Welcome back to Son of Chelsea. Daniel Childs here. Newcastle 2, Chelsea 0. My review, reaction and breakdown of today's pretty devastating defeat at St James's Park. It's not the first defeat we've had at St James's Park, but in terms of this season, in terms of what happened today, it could prove to be a real killer blow. However, given the results that have happened since this game, in the context of the Champions League race, obviously, it's not the end of the season. Chelsea, in some ways, if you look at the maths of it all, Chelsea still kind of have to do the same thing they knew before a ball was kicked today. However, you can't hide away from the damaging nature of today's defeat psychologically, and also the name that is going to gain the most scrutiny from today, Nicolas Jackson, who of course is now out, suspended for the final 2 Premier League games. And I guess the big question for everyone, has Nicolas Jackson cost Chelsea Champions League football? We will not know the answer to that question for another 2 weeks. However, we can speak about today, him and the rest of the performance in what was on the day, a really disappointing defeat. Now, I was unable to watch the game live, so I saw the result. I saw what was going on. People were texting me, so it was kind of spoiled for me. But I actually don't mind that, to be honest, because not knowing anything and then probably having to watch this game back with the hope that something good would happen would have probably been more crushing than actually just knowing and then having to just, see in front of my eyes how it all played out. And kind of it didn't really change my perception based on what people were telling me, actually seeing it, the replay of it basically. Chelsea, unfortunately, all the praise I gave them after that Liverpool defeat, it kind of is in reverse this week. You talk about a big game feel, a time for Chelsea to act seriously and how seriously they acted against Liverpool. You flip that round this week. The absolutely abysmal start, the petulance, the stupidity, the selfishness of Nicolas Jackson to cost his team in such a big way on such a big occasion. And the infuriating fact that this was not a game where Chelsea were completely obliterated by Newcastle. For 10 men, for a substantial period of the game, Chelsea played with 10 men and actually had opportunities, had some big chances, even in the second half, to make this game at least a draw. And I think that will be the most infuriating thing, not just for us as fans, I'm sure Enzo Maresca, the players as well. And given the way we started the game, that is what cost Chelsea mainly. Because although, of course, Newcastle scored again through a deflected goal from a Guimarães shot very late on, this was not a game where Chelsea were completely battered. And given the fine margins at this stage of the season, the lack of margin for error, that is something that I really hope isn't the end for Chelsea. However, I also do want to broaden it out and say Jackson being red carded does not mean that's not the only reason Chelsea are going to miss out on Champions League football if that is the path we go down in the next 2 weeks. There is a lot more about this season that has led to this, and I was kind of thinking and reflecting on the game that it's kind of ridiculous given where we sat in December that we've come to May where effectively our destiny, our ability to look at the season and define it as a success or failure comes down to a series of basically playoffs away from home against teams who were direct rivals for Champions League qualification. When you actually look back at the gap that Chelsea had in that early December period when we were up at second, and then you think about our form from mid-December, I'd argue maybe just to kind of march effectively towards the March international break, and even some of course, the results we've had since then, the draw against Brentford, the draw at home to Ipswich that have been very damaging. That is what has cost Chelsea and dragged them into a slog really for Champions League qualification that could have been avoided when you look at some of the way Chelsea have kind of faltered this season. So what I don't want, despite what I'm about to say about Jackson, is one individual and one moment is not what cost your entire season, especially in the context of Chelsea. There's a lot more that obviously goes into that, but in the context of this game, it was really damaging. Now, I can't, in hindsight, turn around and go, oh, what an awful starting 11, because it was a starting 11 I and many others predicted. And the logic was that 11 had performed so well against Liverpool, had shown positive signs against Everton before that. Having Romeo Lavia, Moises Caicedo, you had a team against, in Liverpool's case, who have wide threats. I don't know how much of it is profile, how much of it is, individuals failing a tactical system. This is always something that, as much as maybe I'm guilty and many of us are of kind of trying to nail down things constantly. I think just overall, Chelsea's start on a very basic level was just unacceptable. And I don't know how much of that is, well, this is an example that Maresca's approach to play Caicedo at right back has failed. I think it's more a case that the team just wasn't up for it. The team just psychologically wasn't there, and we were bossed, mentally, physically, tactically in that opening period. And that is what cost us. That is what gave Newcastle the lead. That is what gave them the impetus. That's what lifted their crowd. You did not need to be a rocket scientist or a tactical genius to decipher and predict what was going to happen on this Sunday at St James's Park. We knew, not only from our history, extensive bad history at this ground, but also just watching Newcastle, there was going to be a period, especially early on, they were going to go at Chelsea. Even looking at that starting 11 where they had to make some changes because thinking back on it, there was no Kieran Trippier. They kind of changed their system in a way. And in some ways, they're a bit more attacking. Tonali is going to make runs into the box. Bruno Guimarães. The speed of Gordon out wide. The threat of Alexander Isak. At times that Newcastle are very direct. They use their physicality at set pieces. These are all things, again, that are not big shocks about these big away games. And I think that is also something that really frustrates me, is when you look at a big away game, what you have to do. It's a cliche, but it's so true. You have to earn the right to play. You have to fight through adversity. You have to do a lot of work off the ball to earn the right to potentially then get yourself on the ball and start passing the ball around and playing your game. And the frustrating thing for me was off the ball, where Chelsea, I think, really excelled in periods against Liverpool and showed their willingness to adapt, their willingness to suffer a bit. This was the complete opposite. The lack of protection for the back four. I think Chalobah, who was criticised in the build-up to the first goal, but also, Colwill had to do a lot of work to bail Chelsea out on a number of occasions today. And that's not good enough. That's not good enough from Lavia off the ball. Lavia gets a lot of praise on the ball, but being that midfielder, being in that area, you have to also be very effective off the ball. And simply Chelsea were not good enough. Chelsea did look a lot better later in the game when Caicedo did move into central midfield. Reece James came on. But, it kind of felt like too little too late. I'm not saying that there was no chance for Chelsea to score. Obviously, Reece James had a big chance early on. You rattle through them. Cucurella had a shot that was saved by Pope in the second half as well. Enzo Fernandez had a shot that was saved well by Nick Pope as well. So, again, in reflection, it's not a complete battering. It's actually a better away performance if I look at it from that context than the Arsenal one. The Arsenal one was completely hopeless. So at least there was some impetus for Chelsea. But I think, you look at that start and just psychologically, just the team was just not there. And that's what really frustrates me and slightly concerns me, because it shouldn't have been a shock. And because the stakes are so high at this stage of the season, it simply is unacceptable. And I don't look at the improvement in terms of chance creation and Chelsea going at Newcastle a bit more in the second half as progress. At this stage of the season, it's brutal. If you're not winning, if you're not even drawing, which can be positive for you, if you're getting 0 points, it's not progress, it's failure. And I hope that is the mentality inside the club. Because I've talked a lot about stakes. And I was sort of seeing some discourse even online from Chelsea fans. And yeah, sure, the mathematics of it was, it's easier to say this now after the game has happened, but it's not that big of a game. No, this is a huge game. It's a huge game for Chelsea to take points off their rivals, to show against a team that have played Champions League football more recently than Chelsea, and a team that you need to be competing with, that you are up for the fight. You can face that physicality head on against Newcastle in their own backyard. Confront it and show that actually Chelsea are moving forward. What that opening period did was the complete opposite. And that leads us to Nicolas Jackson, who I guess is kind of such a big part of this game, right? And listen, there will be so much hurled at Nicolas Jackson. I have been a fan of Nicolas Jackson. I've been someone who's defended him. I've been someone who's sung his praises. I felt, given the low bar actually and the low expectation levels for him when he signed for Chelsea in 2023, and looking at his output last season, I was very impressed. The start of this season up until his injury, I was also impressed. But his performance levels, coupled with what has happened today, is obviously going to tarnish the view of him for a lot of people. If you weren't sold on Jackson, what he did today is just going to kind of cement that, and people going to the extreme of they never want to see him put on the shirt again. I'm not like that personally, but the infuriating nature of seeing a player do that at that time. I've seen a lot of discourse as well about the VAR thing, right? You can show me screenshots of what Mings, the Mings challenge and against, I think, Bournemouth on Saturday. You can show, I've seen screenshots as far back as like 2 years ago from things that were judged differently. People bringing up the lap penalty again that shouldn't have been a penalty against Ipswich. These are all things that we can talk about, but at the end of the day, Nicolas Jackson decided to petulantly swing an arm and an elbow that maybe elbowed his team out of the Champions League race when he didn't need to. His performance levels have been concerning to abject for quite a period of time now. Last week, it was very poor against Liverpool, and obviously today, it never really got going because the most notable thing he did in this game was put his team down to 10 men. You then, in the age of VAR, you put yourself in a situation where then you are vulnerable to being sent off and costing your team when they're already up against it in a big away game. You have the double kind of punch knockout blow of being 1-0 down early on, which is the worst start possible. You couldn't have asked for a worse start at St James's Park. And then, not too long after, you have your centre forward going off. So already a team that, you're concerned about how they're going to get back into this game. You take away an attacking player where then Enzo Maresca makes a kind of more defensive substitution late on. It's completely immature. And in some ways, it reflects the immaturity of this current Chelsea squad and the flaw of Chelsea sporting directors assembling a squad that is so immature. These are not new points. These are kind of points that have been talked about over and over again, but they really do cost you. It's very true, I think, in football at the elite level, that your biggest flaws usually, more so in the league than maybe in the cup, where you can get a bit lucky and you can go on a run, but most of the time, those things will cost you at the most inopportune but crucial times. And as much as Nicolas Jackson has, I think, done a lot of positive things for Chelsea, this undeniably, you can't spin it. You can't have a go at the official. You can't talk about how the crowd maybe influenced the referee. As an individual, Nicolas Jackson has deeply cost his team there and put himself out of the equation now for the remaining 2 games, which then leaves a conundrum for Enzo Maresca for what he's going to do for the remaining 2 games. Are you putting Pedro Neto there? Are you putting Tyreek George there? Are you putting Cole Palmer there? But to be fair, based on performance levels and influence, I think many people would think, actually, that's not the worst thing, because Jackson has not been the leading focal point presence that, unfortunately, he hasn't been that for a long time for Chelsea, and it's a shame, really. And I hope this isn't the end of his Chelsea career. I really don't. But the clamour for us signing someone better in the summer has been there for a long period of time. And based on the evidence of this season, even if Chelsea don't fall short, there will still be that clamour for a more superior centre-forward. And, you look at Isak didn't have a great game on this occasion, right? And that, again, is frustrating, right? Like, you keep that guy quiet and you still don't win the game, or you don't even, avoid defeat. That's frustrating to me. I look back at that game and I think such fine margins. Like, psychologically, it felt like to me in that second half, Newcastle were fearful of losing their lead because it's this period of the season and they have to get these 3 points over the line. And the frustrating thing is, you think if Chelsea had 11 men in that situation, what would have been the alternative scenario? And it's not me going, it's a positive. I'm just, that's the infuriating thing. But it's 0 points. It's 0 points. There's no two ways about it. And Jackson, I think many people won't even have him starting in the Conference League final because of what he's done. And as a club that has spent, this is something that we've come back to so often, but it's a fact that it's very, very hard to spin round when you've spent the amount that Chelsea have. And you look at key parts of the team, and mostly in football still, despite all the tactical evolution, you look at your goalkeeper, you look at your centre-forward. And the fact that Chelsea don't have an elite player, a killer, in both of those boxes is a problem. It remains a problem. It's not me sitting here and saying Sanchez was at fault today. No, he wasn't. But it's a reflection on the flaws that have been there for a long period of time. And they crop up very brutally in games like this. And that's why it has cost Chelsea on a number of occasions. Now, I am going to flip this round and try and give some optimism here in terms of the reality of the top 4 race, because it is still up for grabs. It is still very much topsy-turvy. It is still kind of in Chelsea's hands. We beat Man United next weekend and we beat Nottingham Forest on the final day. Chelsea will have Champions League football, despite what Aston Villa would have to do something absolutely insane in terms of goal difference. And I know in terms of their fixtures, they're facing two teams who seemingly have given up playing Premier League football this season, unfortunately, because of their own circumstance. But, I still do think, if Chelsea win those two games, they will most likely, barring some complete freakish event, will have Champions League football. So in that sense, it's a positive, right? You still have it within your hands. You're not clamouring for other teams to bail you out to get you through. Nottingham Forest proved this once again by failing to beat Leicester, already relegated Leicester at home. They were 2-1 up and they let it slip late on. Psychologically, I think mentally, I think physically, Forest look like they've been flagging for a while, and they've gone through Brentford, they've gone through Palace, and now Leicester, and only gained 2 points from those 3 games. So Chelsea, in some ways, I've heard the narrative spun that Chelsea have been unlucky in the top 4 race. I mean, I completely disagree. When you've got rivals doing that in a period of games where they should have picked up maximum 9 points, no, Chelsea have been very fortunate, and they're fortunate that they face probably a Nottingham Forest who, given what happens next week, might actually be completely out of the race. And Chelsea face a Man United side, the worst Man United side I've ever seen. And, you've got to put them to the sword. If you can't, and then you can't go and put a serious performance on the final day, you don't deserve Champions League football. And, that's what makes it kind of two things, right? Like, we look at the performance of last week, which was wonderful, which gave us so much optimism. The response of the team after Fulham to try and, revive the season and keep it going. But then you've also got the evidence of today away from Stamford Bridge, where the team turns up and doesn't look prepared mentally. I mean, doesn't look prepared physically. You can argue tactically as well. Should a more suitable right back have played against a threat like Gordon? You will have that conversation, especially if Reece James on the bench and put Caicedo in midfield. And obviously Nicolas Jackson. I'm not blaming, you can't blame Enzo Maresca for Nicolas Jackson doing what he did at the start in that game. It's just an individual head loss and an individual selfish moment that has cost his team dearly. However, what you can't do is say, up until that moment, everything was plain sailing. We were already 1-0 down at that point. We had already looked like a team who hadn't shown up. And that in itself is most of the battle for Chelsea this season. It's in that opening period, watch the first 20 minutes of the Liverpool game, watch the first 20 minutes of this game. It's like watching two very different teams. And it's the question now for the remaining 2 games, and you can add the Conference League final in that as well. What Chelsea are we going to get? Because that is why it's kind of a toss of the coin at the moment. If I see the Chelsea that played Liverpool, if I see the fighting spirit that turned around the Fulham game, I think Chelsea can get Champions League football. I really do. If we get what we have in the opening period of this Newcastle game, if in periods of this season, that kind of lackadaisical, kind of sleepy, not very serious Chelsea, then we won't get Champions League football. So I'm kind of left in it. It's a lot more simple. It's a lot more cut and dry at this point, where, it's either you get the job done or you don't, and then we assess it at the end of the season. So I'm not happy that Chelsea have gone for another big away game without winning. Or not coming away with any positives. It's not a positive to lose 2-0. And listen, I'm not having a go that the players didn't do anything to try and resolve or try and reclaim a situation that had been massively dampened and affected by one of their teammates doing something stupid, undeniably so. But we're in the end game now. Like, you've got to be putting points on the board, unfortunately. And if you're not, it's just brutal. It's a failure. So, we will assess what is going forward. Man United, it's still so, it's, the mad thing about this, right, is, I'm thinking about it. I can't see Aston Villa not beating Spurs or Spurs doing anything at Aston Villa. The logic then should apply for Chelsea against Man United, despite our history against them. And that should be 2 wins on the board, which then will take it to the final day. But we're kind of in this stage of the season now where, in a dream scenario, if Chelsea were to beat Man United and say Villa lost to Spurs, can't see it happening. But in that scenario, Chelsea would then have Champions League football. So we are now in that stage where one slip up from any team is deadly, which is why today was very damaging, even though when you look at the table, Chelsea still have kind of the same mission. Please let me know your thoughts, your feelings, all that good stuff in the comments below. I'll be back again very soon to react to news. We'll look at some of your comments. We'll obviously start to preview and look ahead to Friday's huge game in the race for Champions League qualification at home to Man United. Follow me across the socials at SonOfChelsea, and I will see you again very soon. All the best.